the audience is just going to come in. Um, I'm just going to do the intro in Turkish because I'm just going to tell people that this broadcast is going to be English if you don't mind, Dr. Lakhtakia.
Sure. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Arkadaşlar hoş geldiniz yayınımıza. Şimdi yayınımızda 12 kişi var, 14 kişi var. Gelen insanlara da söylerseniz bu yayın tamamıyla İngilizce olacak. Profesör Akhlesh Lakhtakia ile bu konuları konuşacağız. Cagla Tugaltay cinayeti, CTF teknolojisi. Arkadaşlar lütfen gelen insanlara bu yayının İngilizce olacağını siz de lütfen yazın arkadaşlar. Çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Mr. Lakhtakia, thank you so much for accepting my offer and invitation to come over to my live broadcast to talk about the CTF technology. And then we got, just for the audience to know that I connected with Mr. Lakhtakia back in April. I believe that it was the 2nd of April. And I briefly spoke about the Cagla Tugaltay case. And then also just mentioned about the article, the CTF technology, the columnar thin film technology, to understand if we can really just help this case be solved or just help the authorities to use this technology. Without further ado, I would like to actually just again welcome Mr. Lakhtakia. Thank you so much. So let's go ahead and just have your intro, and then we can delve deep into this matter and topic.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for having me on your show. Well, my name, Akhlesh Lakhtakia. I'm a professor of engineering, science, and mechanics at the Pennsylvania State University, where I've been employed since 1983. I obtained my bachelor's degree from IIT India, BHU, and then my master's and PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Utah. Most of my work is on electromagnetic fields and thin films. And while I was working on thin films, I was introduced to the idea of using thin films for detecting or for visualizing fingerprints at crime scenes, collected at crime scenes. And so I started research in 2010 with a colleague named Bob Shaler, who was actually a forensic scientist. I am not a forensic scientist. And my research has continued until last year. After COVID, we did have a small problem, and I did not renew that research after that.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
So basically, for the audience to better understand it, the reason why we connected, and then I was actually just very surprised because somebody that is actually in the articles, even Wikipedia, is yourself. That your response actually just really just made me very excited, and then I overjoyed the conversation that I wasn't even able to even comprehend, thoroughly about that the conversation that you and I had, the correspondence that we have on the platform that you and I connected. So what I have actually just done per the information that you provided about the CTF, and I was thinking that we could just tie this to the ongoing case, which is 3-year statute of limitation extension for this Cagla Tugaltay case that actually occurred in year 2000 in Istanbul, Turkey. And then the more I delved into the technique, which is especially useful on non-porous and semi-porous surfaces, and such as glass, like the metals, adhesive tapes. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like the also the plastic packaging. Basically, you also just can recognize those from the CDs, DVDs. I would say that polymer banknotes. Even it was actually shocking for me that similar materials as well. So then I actually just studied more and better understood those, like the CTF can actually just produce the high quality, the rich detail, and then also the strong visual, like the contrast on the surface that the fingerprint was detected. Sometimes it can even, as you mentioned in your article that you share with me, it can outperform those traditional methods. So would you mind just telling more about the CTF? And then what I actually just missed to complement what I actually just mentioned to you.
Certainly, certainly. Well, I also want to add here that this technology can work very nicely for partial bloody fingerprints. So, oftentimes, part of a fingerprint that has been left behind at a crime scene is latent, meaning you can't see it, basically.
Hidden.
But
Yeah.
part of it is bloody, and therefore you can see some part of it, some things, some details, not all details, because blood also obscures. Okay. And in a traditional technology, what you have to do is you have to separate the bloody part from the non-bloody part and process them differently if you want to see the details of the fingerprint. But with CTF technology, you can do them together. One more thing that interesting about this technology is that when people load a gun with a bullet, okay, they on the bullet they leave behind their finger marks, and when the bullet is fired, there is a lot of hot gas produced inside the barrel of the gun, and that destroys the finger mark. Uh, However, there is a little bit of acid. The fingerprints contain a little bit of acid, and as a result, the fingerprint is slightly etched onto the bullet, on the bullet. And this technique, at least in a few efforts we made, was able to expose uh, those finger marks too. So that is kind of different from traditional techniques. So basically, let me tell you what how the thing operates. Okay, imagine that you have a flat surface on which there are trees growing. They are all tall fir trees. Okay, and let us say they were all planted at the same time. They have grown at the same rate, so their tops will be at the same height. Okay.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
from if you look from the above the trees, they will look as if they are flat because the ground underneath is flat. But if the ground underneath has hills, and it is a rolling ground, then the surface topography, the ground topography, will also be reflected in the treetops. Okay, because all the trees are of the same height. Therefore,
Okay.
the trees that are on a higher level ground will be higher than the trees that are on lower level ground. So, in other words, from the top, from the treetops, you can actually gather what the topography of the ground underneath it is. So columnar thin
Mhm.
films work exactly in the same way. What we do is we grow a film which is made up of parallel columns, and they are all growing up. Okay, these are nano columns. They are of diameter on the order of 50, 60, 70 nanometers. Very, very,
Mhm.
very thin, very, very small. Okay, they are made of building blocks that are between 1 and 3 nanometers in size. So really small. You cannot see them with your eyes. Okay. All right. And they grow anywhere between 100 nanometers to about 1,000 nanometers. Those heights are optimal for forensic purposes. We can grow them much, much higher if you want to. Okay, so what we do is we take a fingerprint that is on a substrate and we put it in a vacuum chamber. So, in a vacuum chamber, there is very low pressure, and we evaporate a material. This material, the vapor itself is like, think of it like rain. All the droplets are moving in the same direction, so they condense on the fingerprint, and they form columns like those trees. And then after a certain period of time, we decide, okay, no more, we will not deposit anymore, and we stop the deposition process. And so this columnar thin film is formed. Now, the optical properties of these columnar thin films are different from that of the fingerprint below. And if we have chosen the right kind of material, and if we have chosen the right height of these columns, then we will get an image that we can see very easily. That means the forensic examiner can examine, and they can also put it under a microscope, not a strong powered microscope, a simple
Basically, the
ordinary.
latent becomes visible, right? The
The
latent
latent becomes
fingerprint
visible. Yeah, and they
visible.
can they can they can see the ridge detail. So if you look at your fingerprints, you will find there are ridges on fingerprints and
Because
loops.
it is producing like better contrast than the VMD. For example, the VMD, the vacuum metal deposition would not necessarily provide that kind of contrast on the surface.
So vacuum metal deposition works nicely on polymer substrates.
Okay,
Okay.
polymer
It
substrates.
will not
Okay,
work on, say, metallic substrates. It will not work on
okay, okay,
glass. Okay. So
okay,
CTF
okay.
technology works on glass. It will work on metals. It will also work on polymers, on some polymers better than
Mhm.
other polymers. Okay. But
Yeah.
I have to
Okay.
say that much more research needs to be done, because you have to, for any polymer, you need to find the right kind of material to deposit. Okay. And
Okay.
that's a matter of research that takes time. Okay. So
Mhm.
once the CTF is formed, then it can be photographed, it can be examined. And what's amazing about this technology is, this is something you will not be able to see with your own eyes. If you look at a ridge on your fingerprint, at any ridge on your fingerprint, you will find it to be kind of a continuous curve. But that is not all. This is a continuous curve in which there are pores. Like imagine a chain of mountains, and some of those mountains are actually volcanoes with calderas. So there are depressions. So this is called a level 3 detail. It's of course very difficult to see, and you can actually see that with CTF technology. I have a colleague, Partha Banerjee at the University of Dayton. So he and I pursued a project. Once I had deposited a CTF on a fingerprint, then he would actually use holography techniques, and
Yeah. Okay.
he would record a three-dimensional image on a computer, and then this three-dimensional image can be viewed by a forensic examiner, and they can view it from the top, from the side, this way, so they can have a better
Yeah.
understanding of the.
Because that's going to give a hologram. It's just like a
Yes,
physical form, so you can actually just view it from different angles.
that is right. It's
Okay.
possible to do that. Yes. One
All
more
right.
thing about CTF technology is, and this is something many people don't realize, that when you touch something with your fingerprints, oftentimes you leave between 1 and 3 cells behind of your body. Okay, so that is called. So those one to 3 cells, they are of course very small, and the number is very small, but they contain genetic material, and they contain two types of genetic material. One is mitochondrial DNA, which you have inherited from your mother only, and the other is nuclear DNA, where where what you got from your mother and father got combined in a certain way, which is unique to you. Okay, and so both nuclear DNA and mitochondrial DNA are present in very, very tiny quantities in a fingerprint. Now, if by a process called PCR, polymerase chain reaction, this DNA can be amplified. By that, what that means is that you can make many copies of the DNA, many copies, huge
Yeah.
zillions of copies, really. And then you can analyze the DNA and then determine the identity of the person. But of course, sometimes this process does not succeed, because if a very small amount of, if only 1 cell is left, for example, maybe it will not work. Okay. Also, there can be
Hmm.
environmental damage. The
That's right.
deposition of the CTF actually preserves the DNA, because it is also deposited on top of those cells effectively. So it
Hmm.
preserves the DNA. And with a colleague named Rena Roy at Penn State, she's a geneticist, a forensic geneticist, we were able to determine that there is a 95% chance that the DNA from those two or three or one cell that were entombed by
which
the
is which
finger.
is which is actually, yeah, which is actually spread by touch of the person, right, on the
The
surface,
person
so
who
they can
touched,
actually just leave it.
the person
Okay,
who
that is
touched.
awesome information. Okay,
Yes,
okay.
so that can be, so this way you can have, two types of identification: the fingerprint using the CTF technology, and the touch DNA, as it is called, using DNA forensics. Of course, this kind of technique was not available even as late as, let us say, 10 years ago. Touch DNA was not very well advanced, but nowadays it is extremely well advanced.
Yeah, so the case that we're actually just looking at there, like I'm just going to tell you more in detail about what has been done, what has not been done in the year 2000. But before I would like to, before I just go proceed to that side, some people were asking me offline about like what originally led our professor to adapt this columnar thin film technology from those non-materialistic research, like how you actually just like apply this in your view, like what made you actually just advance this technology, or in other words, what was missing or insufficient that you came up with this idea with your partner, that you actually just built this technology together.
Well, actually, there are two there are two parts to that story. The first part is that I work at in electromagnetic fields. I work on in the optical regime, and part of that
Mm-hmm.
regime is something we can see, light, the colored light that we see. So color has fascinated me for a long time. And in nature, color is formed in two different ways. One is using pigments, which we all know, like you paint your clothes, for example, with pigments, right? Another way color is formed is in terms of a periodic structure that gives rise to, I think many people will recognize when I say Bragg's law, but they may have learned in high school physics. So Bragg's law, in effect, creates a wavelength dependent color separation. And so you can see that quite easily. In fact, if you look at a window, for example, on which there is a film of oil, you can see colors. Okay. Sometimes on the road, you can see where a car has dropped some oil, you can see colors, fringes formed. So those are all structural colors, as they are called. Okay. And
Mm-hmm.
they depend very much on the way you view them. So anyway, so this is something I was interested in. And I came to know that butterflies, some butterfly wings are strongly colored because they have structural color. Others, of course, because of pigments. And I said, is there a way to reproduce the structural color in a laboratory? So I thought what I would do is to deposit these columnar thin films on the wings of butterflies,
Mm-hmm.
which actually I was able to do. And I was able to I was able to then separate the columnar thin film from the wing and be able to see color. Just that color was different from the wing's color, of course, because I had not optimized everything, but that we could see color that way. And I also was working at the same time on determining the amount of toxic material that could be present in a gas. Okay, for example, if somebody releases a toxic gas somewhere, can we sense how much? What is the concentration? Because depending on the concentration, remedial measures will have to be taken. Okay. So, in that
Exactly.
connection, I thought I should talk to a forensic scientist because they will know about toxins much more than I would know. I mean, my knowledge was very little of that. So, I contacted a forensic scientist named Bob Shaler, who was one of my colleagues in the university. And Bob said to me, "Come on around and I'll tell you about it." And he and I had a long discussion. At the end of it, it turns out that forensic scientists actually don't use real toxins. They use false toxins, meaning those toxins are not injurious to the human body, but they have the same forensic characteristics as real toxins have. So this way, this is for safety purposes. So I said, okay,
Exactly.
fine. And then as I was about to leave, he asked me if I could help him solve a problem. And I said, what's the problem? And he says, there are fingerprints that are left behind at crime scenes and nobody can see them easily and identify the fingerprints. And I was very surprised. I thought from crime shows on television that perpetrators are very easily caught that way.
Like forensic
But
files.
forensic files kind of a thing. But he said, no, no, no, that is all for TV. There's a lot of work involved, and even then, you are not successful many times. And you may be able to see fingerprints on, for example, the shiny blade of a knife. Okay, but what about a fingerprint that has been left behind on the dull wooden handle of the knife? As an example.
Mhm, mhm.
Okay. And I said, okay, well, I said, I didn't know that. But he said, can you think of a way? So since I was already depositing columnar thin films on butterfly wings, by the way, they were all dead butterflies. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
I decided I should try, and I did. So I had my own fingerprint. I gave my own fingerprint on a glass slide, and I
Just a
deposited the
test.
film
Just a test. Yeah.
just to test. And the picture that came, the thing that came out was fantastic. It was I took a photograph, emailed it to Bob, and Bob was ecstatic, and he says, wow, this is amazing. So that is how it all began.
This absolute breakthrough, because that actually was the this actually that prompted me to actually just get interested in this as well. So now, I think that I should be actually just telling you more about this case. And now, because this is a cold case again, like 20, it actually just occurred 26 years ago, and this 15-year-old girl named Cagla Tugaltay, is I actually just like mentioned to you earlier that this was a topic, if even before I moved to the United States, this was actually something that really, took up a lot of my mental energy to understand what exactly has been done and not has been done. So basically, this girl is arriving home in the afternoon after school. Then there was no sign of forced entry or anything like, like an alarm going off or anything like that. And then nothing appeared to have been stolen in the house or in the apartment. So then investigators concluded she was killed with a knife, that actually the throat was slit. And then what I actually just understand from the testimonies of people, that she was stabbed, like the knife was plunged into the neck, and after that the person just lifted out there, and then somebody finds it and then unplug it and then splatter the blood splatter, just like, splashing all over the face of the person that actually just found. That was my assumption, despite the fact that, there was some stories about that the father is coming after, mother is trying to reach out to the girl from outside, that she's out on a doctor's appointment. And then the neighbor, downstairs neighbor, is going up after the lady. The mother calls the downstairs lady, hey, go and check on my daughter, that I cannot get a hold of her. And then she goes up and then opens the door, and then she actually was set up on a bed that was like, sexual assault that was done by somebody. But then the forensic investigators, and at that time the coroner report said that there was no, like, sexual attack or just any kind of like abuse on the body. But then the pictures just suggested that her legs were just spread open, so her school uniform was not necessarily just bloody, as people said that would be bloody. And then, according to one of the forensic architects named Hakanizgi, that I would like to also just introduce him to you, that he's one of those people that are actually just looking at this matter very scientifically, mentioned that the bar, the pressure of the blood that actually just came out from the neck of the girl was 0.16 bar. And then testimonies, I'm not necessarily just going to go into all the single details due to the time constraint, but would like to just give you that, like, some key forensic findings, that most blood evidence belonged to the girl. And then this was the report that actually just came from the authorities at that time in year 2000. We are looking at 26 years ago. So the blood stains found on her clothing and then throughout the apartment were consistent with her DNA. So then there was a male DNA that was discovered, and then the male DNA was profiled it was actually just reportedly found beneath one of her fingernails. That was actually her pinky fingernail. Then that actually was just it was actually found in later forensic testing. Basically, they could not find this DNA in 2000, but they actually found it in 2014, which actually just was an alarm for me. How is it possible that they actually just kept that nail that was caught in the crime scene, that wasn't caught in the forensic lab? Basically, they didn't take the body to the forensic lab. The cops are just going there, crime scene. They go and just clip the nails from the matrix point and just put on those containers. But we do not have any kind of suggestion that they use separate containers like A, B, C, D, like the five fingers, A, B, C, D, E, F. We do not have any of those details. So we do not know how it was actually just kept, where it was kept. But what we understand from the statement from the police that was working on the case, they mentioned that the cops are just going there. They are not taking any photos of the process while they were just taking out those matrix fingers, because as far as I understand, they're not necessarily just clipping the tip of the nail. They're actually just getting from the matrix point the entire just fingernail is just being taken off. So, but when we're looking at the um, overall process, they didn't necessarily just follow the legal procedures or forensic best practices. Basically, those DNAs that they found did not match several people. In 2014, they actually just found those DNAs. So they just took some people into the custody, including the neighbor's son, and then the neighbor lady that found the body. They didn't actually just find, they didn't match it. So they didn't. They also there was also a composite DNA that mixed DNA profiles were found on some items, such as several stains on the shorts contained DNA from both male and also female contributor. They also saw some profiles. They did not necessarily lead investigators to an identified suspect. So then they still claim that the fingerprint evidence exists on that pinky nail, and then investigators reportedly recovered three unidentified fingerprints from the apartment, but they didn't necessarily just match it to anybody, because they were the father, mother, the brother. They all lived in the same place, so the police automatically didn't necessarily think, hey, this is the perpetrator or the culprit is somebody from the apartment, because everybody's thinking that there was a sexual attack attempt, and then because of some difficulties, more with some erectile dysfunction, or a lot of people say the person is a pervert, and then he went there, he knew that the mother was not home, and then there were lots of controversial statements from some media patrons, some media people that actually just say some claim. So what I actually just identified those findings. So they found some evidence, like shorts, for example. On the clothing, there was blood belonged to the girl, but there was no sperm on the clothing, like the shorts that she was wearing. She was supposedly wearing something that was covering her underwear, like for her skirt, not to actually just spread around due to the wind and stuff. She was wearing something like a volleyball legging kind of like a thing, over her underwear. So then the police actually identified that the perpetrator, um, or they claim that it was the perpetrator. He took out the underwear and then the shorts separately. So that was actually an alarm for a lot of people. Like, why would the person actually just take out underwear and then the shorts separately? And then nobody answers it, because nobody is actually just thinking that is the family. That is somebody from outside. So there was a stain on the shorts, and then this is number two. Like they named the numbers per what they found. On the first one, the number five was the blood. The number two, there's a stain belonging to the girl, and then that was identified. So then But they also just like made some tests for semen and sperm, and they all came out negative. So there was, on the shorts number 1, 3, and 4, they found some mixed DNA profiles. They were detected in 2013. Basically, the girl was killed in 2000, and then they found those DNAs in 2013. Now, my question to you: would it be possible, as long as you keep those latent fingernails, or you're not detecting in the first place, but in 2013 you're using some technologies, or if you, as the person that actually, and we really appreciate your amazing work and then contribution, by the way, Mr. Laktaki, about this whole thing, if you actually just like get a hold of those forensic investigators or the colonel office medical examiner, by just looking at the technique that they used, would you be able to say, yes, that is the right technique that you guys used to identify a fingernail which was latent in 2000 and you made it visible in 2013? Will that be possible?
Well, it's a tough question to answer. I can tell you that I have done experiments where we took fingerprints on actual objects, like paper, uh, like glass, like metals of various kinds, brass, steel, uh, polymer tapes, Scotch tape, for example. We have taken those and we have kept them outside in summers as well as in winters for as long as a month. And then we have brought them inside, and then we have been able to develop uh, several of them, not all, several of them. Because you see, if the fingerprint mark that is left behind is basically a lot of water which can evaporate. Also, a lot of fatty acids are there, lipids are there. Okay, now these are materials that also contain water in them. So some water is free water that evaporates. Some water is in the lipids. Okay, and then there are some trace materials like salt, for example. Or if the person was under medication, then it is possible that there is some medication also. Some of the medicine is also in the fingerprints. It's possible. So these are all there, but when they are exposed to heat, rain, snow. Okay, in Pennsylvania, where I do these experiments, snow is, of course, very common in winters. So they tend
Of
to
course.
destroy the fingerprint, but there can still be enough left. See, because we have that level 3 pore detail, not only we don't need a complete fingerprint, we can have part of a fingerprint. Okay, and in that part there are ridges, and in the ridges there are those craters like the caldera of volcanoes. Okay, and those are supposedly much more representative of the individual than even the ridges are. Okay, which are for the most part unique, but now we know of cases where fingerprints have been mistaken. There are a few cases like that,
Yeah.
but those pores are supposed to be even more distinctive. So even from partial fingerprints, it is possible to deduce identity. But I'm not a fingerprint examiner myself, so I cannot say with
Yeah, yeah,
great
yeah.
certitude.
Absolutely.
How, however, you can do that, and if the detectives preserved uh, preserved physical artifacts from the crime scene, and it is possible that somebody could have touched them, that the assailant could have touched them. I would say it is possible to visualize. I would say
All
it
right.
is possible to visualize.
Basically, it is possible. So, like, one of my partners is asking, Yelis is asking, could developing forensic technologies reveal a trace that was unseen years ago? And then we answered that question already. So now, could these techniques that you mentioned, let's say that Turkish authorities didn't necessarily just follow those, like, of course, that you would have had an idea, because CTF is what you actually just developed with your partner, would you have any kind of like a preconceived information about that authorities there in Turkey used some of those technologies and best practices that you used, or you wouldn't have this data?
Well, fingerprints are developed using a variety of techniques, mostly powders of various kinds, and some sort of dyes and pigments are used. And of course, the number of these keeps on growing. About 10 years ago, I was at a major forensic lab in Washington, D.C., and they had a catalog of 8,000 different chemicals that have been used to develop fingerprints. Of course, different on different substrates, they have to use different materials, and
Exactly.
so they have to be very careful about those things. So, but if the Turkish authorities actually kept some of that physical artifacts with them, I would say today we know much more about developing fingerprints than we knew 20 years ago. Okay, I think we can do something. It's worth a try, if nothing else.
I'm going to ask you a question live. Like, imagine this is my arm, and then I actually imagine that this is my, fingerprint information or some blood stain that was actually captured in using, minimum of like, 400, and I will say 420p or close to 420p picture resolution camera, that they actually took a photo of my arm during that, like, I don't know who, but somebody did. So let's say that we have this picture that somebody says, for example, father says, of course he came over to the apartment and he said, hey, the first thing that I did was to check if my daughter was killed. And then imagine that there was a big cut on the throat of the girl, and then there was foaming generated, just like formed right over the surface where the slit occurred. And then some people reported, whoever saw those photos, like Hakan Izgi, the gentleman that I told you, that he saw the foam, and then father still just makes the touch and then goes and just touches it to understand if the girl has any pulse. So then he claimed that he had excessive amount of blood on his hands that was dripping. And then there was even an interview that he said, hey, when I came over to the apartment and then I saw my daughter slain, but I didn't know if she was actually killed, so I instinctively went ahead and just took the pulse. And then, I mean, I'm just seeing it as like very suspicious act, because the neighbor that found the girl just like an hour before, she immediately said this person is deceased. She even screams and she says, hey, somebody slit the throat of Chala, she's dead. So everybody's going downstairs, and father comes back and he just takes the pulse, and then he says his hands are all bloody and then is dripping. And then what I was just thinking at the time, that I would say, I mean, there are two questions actually. First of all, would it be even possible for somebody that is going to the crime scene after reported murder occurred like an hour before, and this person goes and then realizes that the girl is just laying down with pure blood everywhere over the bed, and then he still goes and takes the pulse on a cut surface, then his hands are all just getting bloody. When the cops actually come to the scene and see the father says, hey, I just like touch my girl's throat, and that is the reason why my hands all got bloody. And then he explains why there's some like blood drops underneath the apartment, the other story, like this is the upper level story. And then he explains that there was a like a blood drops or blood traces downstairs. First of all, is it even possible to have this outside all these coagulation rules of science in
Yes,
in this, like, example there?
it sounds very strange to me. Blood
Okay.
coagulates very quickly. In fact, if blood remains liquid, then that person did not have clotting agents in their blood. Uh,
Exactly.
Yes,
Exactly,
I would
exactly,
very much doubt. I mean, it's actually a fairly simple experiment. If somebody were to take some blood, for various reasons, and just put a drop on glass, and you will start seeing it congeal within minutes. Actually, so I don't think
exactly.
so. Now, the other point that you brought about the father. Now you have to see he is the father. Let's just for the moment imagine that he is distraught. I would be I would imagine any father would be distraught about their daughter being murdered. Okay, I think when people are distraught, they can do strange things. Okay, they are not under control by of their own control, so they can do strange things. But I don't think that an hour later his hands would be dripping with her blood. I don't think that's possible. No,
This
no.
exactly. So there was actually something that when Hakan Izgi, this gentleman, actually just mentioned that he did not believe the girl was actually just killed by somebody outside the apartment, is because there was no like bewilderment or any kind of like, hey, you know what, confused statement from the girl. She was actually just very kind of like excited to hear or to see or face somebody, and then she goes, ah, it's just like, it's like, oh, you're still here, or you're like, oh, what are you doing up here? But that wasn't actually something the neighbor's daughter actually just reported as that was like an alarm situation. That was just pretty normal, that she actually just sees someone and then she actually just gets like, or maybe excited. So now when Hakan says the body was possibly just taken from one spot in the apartment to another spot, and then she was laid, like she was actually just laid. Uh, she was actually just laying back down, not like face down, and then he actually just explained the girl was actually just cut on the left, but when you're seeing the blood stains were more on the right side. So he concluded that somebody twisted her on the bed before they actually just like fix the adjustment or just fix the alignment to open the or spread open the legs, and then just put the underwear. Is just like all the way, like it was just clumped right in between her feet, and then
They
the
staged the
rug
scene.
under
They
her.
staged they
Yeah,
staged the
exactly.
scene.
They stayed. Yeah, it is obvious they
Yes.
staged. So now what I actually just saw that was very strange, Dr. Lakhtakia. So when I first reached out to you, there was a TV show. They were covering this crime scene. They still did, and then fortunately they put a photo of the deceased girl's leg, and that was very strange. And just because of that exposure, the TV show actually just got some kind of like letter of reprimand or something like that from the authorities. There was a blood stain right over the leg. I believe that was the right leg of the girl, and then it is just like inside the leg. It is just like almost on the shin, in between the shin, and then also like between her ankles and her kneecap, right over that, like, muscly surface. So when I'm thinking about this, there's no way father actually just said in the interviews that like he touched that leg. Basically, he said the only place where I touched my daughter on was on her throat, where he actually just took the pulse. And then the second thing is that her her body was exposed, and then her skirt was a little bit like over her, apparently just over her stomach. So father says I instinctively went ahead and just grabbed the skirt and just covered her private areas. So now there are three things here. First, the skirt that the father touched, that wasn't bloody. So but her entire body, her entire face, and then even the overall, like, face and neck and everywhere was just bloody. Some blood right over splatter on the walls, and then the bed sheet was all just paved with blood. The pillowcase and all those were just paved. And then there was some indications of foam that was still coming on the body. But there was one thing interesting, like I mentioned on my arm, on her leg, there was a blood stain. So it actually just shows somebody carried her, holding her legs. I mean, it actually just suggests two people did it. Two people, because nobody can
It's it
actually
is
just
it is
lift
not easy
and
to it is not easy to move a body. And
move a body. Exactly. Especially
yes.
deceased person without. So now from this example, that when we're looking at this is a clear picture. And I'm assuming that there are also clear pictures of the girl's entire, like crime scene photos, neck, like the cut area and everything. From this enhancements perspective of the like AI, like machine learning algorithms and everything. So since I'm also in IT, that I'm also just working on this too. Is it possible now to evaluate those taken photos to unidentified or latent fingerprints of anybody, just looking at those photos today?
Well, let me say this. Latent fingerprints are called latent because they cannot be seen. And if
That's right.
from by our eyes, and so a camera is cannot record them. However, there may when somebody touches somebody's arm or thigh for that matter, okay, they may leave behind depressions that may persist, and that is particularly true if the person they are touching is no longer alive, because you see blood circulation is stopping at that point. Okay, so there might be marks left that could indicate a thumbprint or a fingerprint or many fingerprints for that matter. It is possible. um, Now the police personnel who took those photographs, first of all, what kind of resolution did their cameras have? That's one issue. But if they were very high resolution cameras, okay, then
Mhm.
I think it is worth looking at digital enhancement of those photographs. And I think today we have AI techniques that if there is some trace obtained, you see, you don't need a full fingerprint, only a small part can be enough at times. Okay, at times.
Okay.
If they obtain, then that can be enhanced, uh, and maybe they match somebody. How do I know? Okay, the real question is that this would be there would be a lot of research involved, and of course, assuming that those photographs were high density photographs and they are available. Okay, some research would be involved, and then after the research, will a judge accept that as evidence? That is a
This
very
yeah,
big
this
issue.
actually a question for yeah, this actually a question. There's a attorney that actually just initiated all this, like, reviving this story that was actually just not necessarily covered by the media. So his name is Ümit Altay. So I'm actually just calling out his name here so that I cannot get a hold of him. But if he gets a hold of me, at least that I can engage you with him, and then he and you and I actually just can go and just speak with authorities there in Turkey. I'm actually just going to pay a visit to Turkey very soon. Maybe I might even just go and visit the prosecutor's office to even speak about this stream. So, doctor, this is just going to be change into the Turkish stream, and then audience is going to be able to actually just convert it from English to Turkish by. I'm just going to show them how to do the setting. So I'm going to be doing the same setup for the prosecutors and the forensic, investigators there in Turkey. So now my question to you will be: if we actually just collect all this data that you actually just shared, and I believe that this is one of the most, I will say, the breakthrough streams that I ever seen, and I'm proud of you. I honestly am just like, somebody that initiated this conversation, but you came forward, and then I'm so grateful to you about this. So now, if I actually can get a hold of this gentleman, the attorney, who has more information about this, case, and as I mentioned that, like, I didn't even see those crime scene photos. So looking at all this evidence, is it possible for you to evaluate what has been done by the, by the colonel's office or the medical examiner so far, like, and then you can provide your insight into verifying some other, like, maybe the touch DNA, cell DNA that you mentioned about,
I
because
I
the
I
only
would be
information that we have about, say one more time.
I would be happy to take a look, but I'm not. I keep in mind
It, it,
I'm not in the police, and I'm not in
yeah,
the business. But as a
exactly.
scientist, I
But
certainly would like to take a look.
that is fantastic. Arkadaşlar duyuyorsunuz. Çok önemli. I'm just making this English in Turkish right now. This is arkadaşlar büyük bir şey duyuyoruz burada. Mr. Lakhtakia, Amerika'nın çok herkesin hemen hemen bu forensic investigation olarak herkesin bildiği, televizyonlara çıkan bir insan. Amerikan Cumhurbaşkanı'nın da tanıdığı birisi. Arkadaşlar onun sayesinde işte bu fundinglerle bu işleri yaptı. Kendisi otoritelerle görüşüp şu anki elde edilen DNA'nın nasıl bir DNA olduğunu inceleyecek ve onlara bazı önerilerde bulunup gerçekten bu katili yakalamamız konusunda bize yardımcı olacağını kendisi söyledi. O yüzden lütfen arkadaşlar bir teşekkür edebilirsiniz. I just like mention to the audience that you're going to be contribute by just reviewing the evidence, and then thanks to the attorney that I am just going to engage with. Hopefully, we're going to be actually just going to have some deep dive conversation with the medical examiner's office, and then also the autopsy person that actually just conducted this autopsy down the road, of course.
Great.
This is I'm very excited actually. So
Thank you.
basically, so when I'm actually just looking at the entire evidence, that I am assuming that they kept the clothing of the girl, like the
Yes.
socks, underwear, the skirt, and then her shirt.
Right.
And do you think that after years passing, just 26 years, I mean, that literally was 26 years back on the 5th of June, 2026, looking at all the evidence collected, if they were kept in an intact state, do you think that we can still identify those cell DNA just looking at those clothing?
Yes. I mean, I can say this with some understanding of this of the technology. Uh, it is definitely possible today to identify DNA that would have been missed 20 years ago. Okay, it's certainly possible to do that. In fact, there is a technology. There is a company called Illumina that makes very highly sophisticated systems for genetic identification. Okay, and they can work with, as I said, one or two or even three cells that they can identify. It is the bigger question would be how to eliminate non-actors, meaning how to eliminate people
Contamination. Yeah.
who were not who did not participate in the crime, but they may have, she went to school, for example, and somebody may have put a hand on her shoulder, as an example, okay, and may have left something behind. So such people will have to be excluded. And but I think it is definitely possible, definitely possible to do that. Yes.
That is fantastic. That is absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
So basically, now we got the starting point on just like getting a hold of those medical examiner, the previous one, an active one, and then whatever that they're actually just doing. That there will be a chance for you to review what they have actually just put together from the scientific point of view. So
Yes.
now I am seeing that if it is possible for everybody to understand, they found some saliva kind of like a evidence outside the apartment complex. So basically, it is a little bit, in my opinion, preposterous to even go after a DNA that was like a saliva or spit or something like that outside the compound or the apartment building compound. And then they're just looking at the evidence right now. I mean, it is very unrelated, in my opinion, because it's not inside apartment. It is outside the apartment complex. They found some saliva. So they're now doing exhuming on deceased people, of course, that they're actually just suspecting this saliva might be belonging to somebody that died 10 years ago, 15 years ago. They're doing exhuming right now. Do you think that that's a good practice to even just go after a saliva that was found outside the apartment, outside the building? We don't even know where, but they're thinking that the killer, he actually might have sped or something like that, and then they actually just can go ahead and just find the killer. Is it even possible? Is it even logical for you to go after that kind of like a DNA?
That certainly sounds improbable, highly improbable. Um, Highly improbable, I would say. But if they have a suspect in mind, then they could perhaps reconstruct his or her movement after the crime. And if in
Mhm.
during that reconstruction, if they find saliva at a specific place that is compatible with the reconstruction, uh, then perhaps yes. Otherwise, it's a shot in the dark.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, got you. I got my answer. So, like, I'm just reading, like, I'm just looking all those like questions, not necessarily just focus on each one of them. But Melike is asking, could you please ask Professor what is the possibility to resolve this based on his experience? Although that you mentioned about, I mean, you gave us some disclaimers about like you're not a forensic scientist,
Yes.
but you work in
Yes.
the field, and then everybody knows you in this field. What is your, I will say, what is the possibility to solve a crime like this based on, I mean, this is a cold case. Remember, this was extended 3 years for statute of limitation was added another 3 years. What's your thought process on this?
Well, I mean, one thing I would say is I don't imagine that the Turkish police was or Turkish criminological practice was very well advanced 25 years ago, 26 years ago. I kind of doubt that. Okay. It wasn't as advanced in the United States at that time. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And even today, unless a case is a very high profile case, routine issues take place in crime labs, which start putting doubts on. Keep in mind that the forensic examiners that are commonly engaged in the United States, for example, they are not PhDs. They
That's
are
right. They're
people
not.
they are people with bachelor's degrees. Often they are police personnel who have had to start doing this kind of work because there is nobody else to do it. Okay. And they kind of get trained on the job, so they have very good training, of course, and they have a lot of experience because they're dealing with crimes all the time. Okay. But uh, but but detectives who are dealing with crimes, for example, in New York City, will be far more knowledgeable and proficient than, say, somebody who is dealing with in Grand Junction, Colorado. In a small town where there are very few crimes, if any. Okay, so it very much depends. I think the Turkish police probably in Istanbul they were probably the best prepared to handle evidence. But 25 years ago, no, I don't think they would know as much. And they may not have actually preserved the right kind of evidence. That's also possible. Yet, it is possible that some evidence was preserved but overlooked. So, a fresh
Overlooked. Exactly.
investigation is a good idea.
It's a good idea. Yeah.
It's a good
And
idea.
also one of our professors, I'm not sure if you know her. Her name is Sevil Atasoy. She's a forensic. She's actually forensic science professor. She did a lot of coverage on TV. She's like a media mogul. I will say that like she had written a lot of books, and then she's very reputable person, and then very trustworthy
I see.
person when she speaks. She's actually just highly respected. So there was one broadcast that she actually just speaks in general view that she says, if you're gonna go after DNA without any motive, you will end up just locking up wrong people in prison system. So like
She
she
is
goes
right in a
after the
way.
motive.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So what is your view on that one?
So
Because
she's
because I would like
she's
to add,
right.
I I would like to add, in Cagla Tugaltay's case, people are going after the DNA. So that's why they're looking at a person that says, on TV, she says, this person that actually did this brutal crime is a pervert. She says, another person, like a media person says. She says, this person who killed Chala, it is father or it is brother or it is from outside, that person is a pervert. Now everybody is looking, whoever committed this crime is someone that is outside the family, because she thinks the person that tried this is a pervert. So automatically Turkish people are thinking that this is not an honor crime, or this is just like a person that had attempted to rape her, and then but he had an erectile dysfunction, or he might have had erectile dysfunction, so he got riled up, and then he ended up just grabbing a knife and just butchering her.
Yes.
So that is the reason why my asking question about motive, what Sibilata Soy says, that you have to first identify the motive before you go and chase the DNA. So that's why
I
I'm
would I
asking
would
you as
say
the
about
authority.
I would not say about first identifying the motive, uh, but at least there should be some understanding of what possible motives are there, and there should be that certainly a pervert could be an outsider who
Yeah,
did that, but there are perverts inside the household, inside your family also. Let's not
exactly.
exclude them. And in addition, there is also for a variety of reasons, it is possible that a family member was a perpetrator or a friend was a perpetrator. These should not be excluded right away, but they should be considered as well. But at the same time, if you go if you go hunting for DNA without some direction, you are going to imprison a lot of innocent people, because she was not living as an hermit. She was living in society. She was going to school, I guess, at the
It's
age of 15. Yes,
absolutely right. Absolutely right.
yes. So
Yeah,
you have to have both things side by side.
exactly. So basically, you need to have equal level of motive and DNA, and then you go
Yes,
after that, or chase down.
yes,
So, the, like you mentioned about this coagulation, that when I actually just there was another host that we got somebody from Turkey that she's also just like a very well-known person. Her name is Zeynep Ümit. So she appeared on my broadcast, a live stream, and then she said that it will be impossible for anybody to have a you know uh, dripping blood patterns, like the father says, hey, like this drops, and there was a
yeah,
neighbor that actually just saw that like blood drops, and then she was chasing it down all the way to the exit of the apartment complex. And then what we discovered, that it is not even possible to have any kind of like a evidence that the father really just like touched the body, and then he started just like pour down the girl's blood on the surface or on the like floors. So now looking at the amount of blood, and there's also eyewitness testimony. A lady, um, uh, her name is Rayhan. She's an older lady. She actually just witnessed this as a as a crime. So she saw this guy, the father, holding the knife outside the balcony or inside the balcony. And then there's an eyewitness testimony. And now the prosecutor is interviewing her, and then they're also just asking, they're just making a lot of sanity just checks on her about like she has
correct.
some kind of like like mental retardedness or anything like that or whatever. So now looking at that evidence, the father had excessive amount of blood on the hands, on the clothing. And now, can we say this person, the father, either is the perpetrator or somebody that could have prevented this crime from happening by taking the knife outside the wound? Because what I understand, when you actually just plunge the knife on the artery, and then on the artery vessel right here, or the vein system. And then, as far as I understand, that the cut was so deep that you can see her internal organs, like the breathing
Yes.
channels and then eating channels and all those things, like esophagus and stuff. So now, when we're looking at that, is there any way to identify with the amount of blood that was on the father given the time of the crime, and he's appearing there on the crime scene? Is it possible to even draw, if I know that you will say, I don't know, maybe the forensic scientists will actually just do this. Is there any way to draw the picture or like the outlay of this crime to better identify, better focus on who
Well,
actually just did it, or if the father
the father could be
witnessed that crime?
should be considered as a person of interest. Certainly, he should be considered as a person of interest, and one should not rule out that he could have been twice in the same room. Uh, at one time, very close to the crime, if not when the crime was committed, and then the second time an hour later.
Hmm. Okay. Okay.
That's
All
a
right.
that's a
Basically,
possibility
yeah. So
to be investigated.
yeah, basically they're also like from. I'm just going to combine it to CTF, because there's some photos of the father. Apparently, that like the witness says, "Hey, I saw this person
Yeah.
with the blood and holding the knife, the weapon," and now there's some pictures of the clothing and everything. Like even from the clothing of the person that actually might have been captured, is it even possible to even just go after those cell DNA, even the CTF, to analyze the photos of the person's outfit to better analyze this?
Not from the photographs. No,
Not
not
from
from
the
the
photographs.
photographs.
Okay.
No, no.
Okay. Okay.
I mean,
Basically, yeah. They
certainly you cannot determine DNA or blood, etc. from photographs. Okay. Uh, what, as I said,
but the
what may
fingerprints, the
be
latent
possible is
fingerprints.
to see if there are impressions of fingerprints left behind, which might be recorded in a high density photograph. Yes,
Hi,
that's a
okay, so this is
possibility.
this is possible. This is possible.
That's
So
yeah.
Darmy was actually just speaking about this, so I actually just wanted to mention about this.
Yes.
So I think that I asked many questions, and then I think that I'm very excited that, because we can talk about the CTF technology over and over, but we got to the bottom of this, that this is the science that might be evaluated in solving this crime. So,
Yes.
Dr. Lakhtakia, thank you so much for your time. First of all, this was an amazing stream. And then you will see that if you actually just check later on how many people viewed this, is going to be thousands of people. And I hope that this stream is going to be watched by those forensic investigators there in Turkey. And then I would like to also just promise, if you ever visit Istanbul, I am going to be your host to actually just take you down the town while we are helping these investigators and forensic scientists there in Turkey to solve this crime. So again,
Thank you.
doctor, thank you so much. Thank you
Thank you.
very much.
You are very kind. And for the sake of that young woman, I do hope that her killer is caught and punished. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. I'm now going to turn to Turkish.
Yeah.
Arkadaşlar, gördüğünüz gibi profesörümüz bize bu konuda yardımcı olacak ve bizim buradaki Türkiye'deki bu investigatorlarla konuşacağız, görüşeceğiz ve bu cinayeti kimin işlediğini öğreneceğiz ve o caniyi inşallah hep beraber kodese sokacağız arkadaşlar. Dr. Lakhtakia, Professor, we love you so much. Again, thank you so much. I
Thank you.
look forward to
Thank you.
speaking
All
with you
right.
again.
Bye
Thank you
bye.
so much. Have a
Bye
wonderful day.
bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye bye.